You are listening to WTUZ Radio Podcast. Welcome to WTUZ Radio Podcast. I am your host, Rhonda, and today we are in our fifth installment of our series, the Black European Royalty and Rulers. Okay, so if you have not joined us, this particular series is based on the book by Dr. John L. Johnson, The Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles. And it is going through the lineage of the Black European royalty that sat on the throne of that time. And he starts out this particular series tracing the very lineage that sat on the throne, and that is, just a second, it's Kenneth the Niger, Dub, okay? And he also goes into where this lineage originally stemmed from, which was definitely out of Africa. So this is from the McAlpin or McAlpine lineage. Okay, so Kenneth McAlpin, the Niger, is the first lineage of the Black European royalty. So all royalty pretty much ties back to this lineage either through direct bloodline or marriage. Okay, so if you have not seen this particular, the past shows, I encourage you to go back and give them a listen. A lot of very interesting stuff in there. We also went over specifically how the houses got founded, okay, and how those houses were created, really not only for bloodline purposes, but also for political reasons also. Okay, so this particular episode, we are going to speak on Queen Matilda, who, interestingly enough, there is not much information on her at all. The closest I found was an Empress Matilda, and that is referring actually to a granddaughter of Queen Matilda, not Matilda herself. Okay, and that's what's been interesting about going through this lineage. I see in some places, for example, in this particular book, The Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles by Dr. John L. Johnson, some of the rulers he didn't include, but I found them other places, and then vice versa. Some he included, and then other places I didn't find them. Okay, so this is Matilda, the Scottish Queen Matilda, who was also called Queen Edith and Maud. So those that are carrying women that are carrying the first names Edith and Maud, I always thought Maud was an odd name. That now you know that that's directly linked to Queen Matilda. So she was the daughter of Malcolm III and Saint Margaret of Wessex. The princess was placed in a convent at age of 6, but throughout her stay never took on the oath as a nun, which gave her state rights to marry Henry I of England. And I've also noticed a recurring theme with the women when they wanted to send them away for whatever reason. Sometimes it was for safety, to keep them safe. They would use the convent. I said covenant. I think I said covenant. The convent Okay. And most of them do not take that oath of a nun, and which that would make sense because they want to make sure that they have the ability to, once they come of age, to come out of there and marry and continue the family's nobility to sit on those particular thrones for rulership. All right, so she didn't take the oath of nun, which gave her state rights to marry Henry I of England. During that matrimony, she gave birth to Matilda and William. Okay, and then I also want you, once again, to notice how they continue to carry their particular ancestors' names through their children, and even women naming their daughters after them, which in the melanated community today, that's not really done. But if you're looking at your genealogy, you're going to see reoccurring names across generation to generations, and you can literally see where, okay, you know, I'm named after a great aunt, etc., etc. So it's very, very interesting to see that this pattern was going on with the European royals, specifically the melanated, aka Black European royals, and those of us in the Americas with European bloodline ties. We see that same theme run as well. Okay, so that just once again is telling you that your entire name is not based on a heritage of slavery. Your name is literally rooted in your family heritage / roots. Okay? That surname you carry means something. It ties back to Europe, not through African slavery, but through your ancestors coming over from Europe, either through they were kicked out of Europe and was forced into an indentured servant contract, which was given a broad stroke for slavery, or they came over on the voyage voluntarily for some type of monetary gain or to find a better life for your family. And yes, you will find those same relatives in the records as melanated, aka Black. So once again, those surnames that you are carrying are not linked to African slavery. Those surnames, if you do your heritage, they will be linked to Black European families, either coming over through an indentured servant contract or coming over because they were exiled from Europe and hence giving a prison sentence, or they came over for monetary gains, which hence could also link them to an indentured servant contract. All right. So during that matrimony, we talked about that she gave birth to Matilda and William. Her daughter married Geoffrey of Anjou and had 3 children, by which the oldest became King Henry II of England. And again, he's just linking back the current monarch, which are the Windsors, which is the 22nd great-grandfather of Elizabeth II. Matilda's Edith lineage is traced all the way back to Kenneth the Niger, who was a descendant of Kenneth McAlpine or McAlpine, Niger Val Dub. Remember, Dub means black, whose lineage is traced to Fergus Moore. Fergus Moore, who was of the African Melanese race, became the father of every Scottish ruler and a continuous line of English rulers through Matilda. Okay, so let's just go back and look at, I really like this particular breakdown on archive.org that breaks down all of the kingdoms, the houses, and rulers. And even on here, they didn't have Matilda. Okay. So like I said, this has been very interesting going through this, which I am enjoying. All right, so let's get to David the First, the Christian king, David the First, who had Pictish blood in his veins, was the youngest son of the Scottish Moorish King Malcolm III, who was a descendant of the Scottish Pictish King Kenneth the Niger. The pious David became ruler of Scotland from AD 1124 to 1153. He believed in supporting religious matters and founded many new bishops and Catholic monasteries. He also built St. Margaret's Chapel at Edinburgh Castles in honor of his beloved mother and many other worshiping centers. The young king, unlike most heads of states, practiced philanthropy by pardoning 3 years of taxation for any subject who improved their homes, dress, and table manners. Now this is important, fam. This is important. He introduced the feudal system of Scotland and distributed huge estates among his countrymen. And we're going to go into feudalism in a little bit so the family can get a clear understanding of why that's so huge. David I and his blood brothers were known to be less barbarous than previous Scottish rulers. They were unthinkably generous to their subjects and diplomatically fair with their enemies. The king died in AD 1153 and was succeeded by his grandson, Malcolm IV. King David I is the 25th great-grandfather of Elizabeth II. Okay, so let's get into feudalism. Let's get into a basic definition. The feudal system, the social and land-owning system of Western Europe in the Middle Ages, or any society that is organized according to rank. So he furthered some of the ideas of the French Revolution by abolishing feudalism. The shift from feudalism to capitalism in Europe during the 18th and 19th century. So here's some more examples. Feudalism was the process by which individuals gave up their personal liberties in return for protection. Marxist theory states that feudalism leads to capitalism, then socialism. Land reform was the only way of ensuring an end to feudalism. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more of feudalism, because this is important. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia. The other definition that I read was from the Cambridge Dictionary. All right, so feudalism is also known as the feudal system, was the combination of legal, economic, military, and cultural customs that flourished in the medieval Europe between between the 9th and 15th century. Broadly defined, it was a way of structuring society around relationships that derive from holding of lands, in exchange for service or labor. This is extremely important, family, because it is telling you their legal system, quote, quote, that they put in play and how they seal the deal from taking the land from the indigenous population and ultimately putting it in the ownership of these monarchs. Okay? So it literally says it was a way of structuring society around relationships that were derived from the holding of land in exchange for service or labor. Although it is derived from the Latin word feudum or fief, I don't know if that's also fief, which was used during the medieval period, the term feudalism and the system which it describes were not conceived of as a formal political system by the people who lived during the Middle Ages. The classic definition by Francis Louis Gansoff described a set of legal and military obligations which existed among the warrior nobility and revolved around the three key concepts of lords, vassals, and fiefs. A broader definition of feudalism, as described by Mark Bloch, includes not only the obligation of the warring nobility, but the obligation of all three estates of the realm. And when you hover over, well, what is this estates of the realm? It's saying the estates of the realm, or three estates, were the broad orders of social hierarchy used in Christendom from Middle Ages to early modern Europe. Different systems for dividing society members into estates developed and evolved over time. Okay, so includes not only the obligation of the warrior nobility, but the obligation of all three estates of the realm: the nobility, the clergy, and the peasantry. Huh? What? Who? So a peasant is a pre-industrial agricultural laborer, or a farmer with limited land ownership. Okay? I know I'm still here, fam. I just wanted that to sink in. Especially one living in the Middle Ages under feudalism and paying rent, tax, fees, or services to a landlord. In Europe, three classes of peasants existed: slaves, serf, and free tenant. I'll jump back. Peasants may hold title to land in either fee simple or by several forms of land tenure among the socage, quit rent, leasehold, and copyhold. I'm going to just flip back. So I want y'all to understand how we got into the situation that we're in now. And that's not even including the behind the scenes with the Pope declaring ruler or Lord or God over the entire realm, and all estates rolling up under a trust, which ultimately rolls up to the Vatican. We're not going to go into that here. We go into that in detail on the Truth Uncompromised show on Thursday. And shout out to Brother Odell, who has given us the details of that pretty much extensively. All right. Okay, so I just wanted you all to peep game on how this stuff was set up. So, and all peasantry, all of whom were bound by a system of manorialism, and manorialism was the method of land ownership in parts of Europe, notably England during the Middle Ages. Its defining features including a large, sometimes fortified manor house in which the lord and manor and his dependents lived and administered. This is sometimes referred to as a feudal society. Okay, since the publication of Elizabeth A.R. Brown's The Tyranny of a Construct and Susan Reynolds' Fiefs and Vassals, there have been ongoing, inconclusive discussions among medieval historians as to whether feudalism is a useful construct for understanding medieval society. Oh, yeah. So let's just get into a couple of examples of feudalism. Okay, so examples of feudalisms, and we're getting this off of Wikipedia, are helpful to fully understand feudalism and feudal society. Feudalism was practiced in many different ways, depending on location and time period. Thus, a high-level, encompassing, conceptual definition does not always provide a reader with the intimate understanding that detail the historical examples provided. Okay, no problem, Wikipedia author, for breaking down that disclaimer. We feel you. So let's get on to it. So for 12th century England, feudalism in the 12th century Norman England was among the better structured and established in Europe at the time. However, it could be structurally complex, which is illustrated by the example of the feudal baron of Stafford as described in a survey of knights' fees made in 1166 and recorded in the Book of the Exchanger. This was a roll of parchment or several such, recording the quantity and tenant of each knight's fee held in captique. It was a record commissioned by the Treasury, as the knight's fee was the primary basis for assessing certain types of taxation. Because I was going to say, that's taxation at the end of the day. For example, feudalism is the exchange of land for military service. So let me sip my water. So, you know how they do. Okay, I may not have the monetary money to pay you, but you do this military tour for me and I'll give you land. Okay? Except really and truly, you still don't really own this land. Okay? You'll never hold title to the land. But let's continue. Thus, everything was based on what's called a knight's fee. Okay? So in feudal Anglo-Norman England and Ireland, a knight's fee was a unit measure of land deemed sufficient to support a knight of necessity. It would not only provide sustenance for himself, his family, and servants, but also means to furnish himself and with his horses, yada, yada, yada. All right, which is fiefdom or estate of land. A feudal baron or barony contained several knights' fee. For example, the Baron of Robert de Stafford held a barony containing 60 knights' fees. Often lords were not so much lords presiding over great estates, but managers to a network of tenants and subleases. So they're basically family are describing a system of landlords and tenants. They're basically describing a system where only nobility benefited from the land. And everybody else, it didn't matter if your family was indigenous to that land, if that land was in your family for hundreds of years, thousands of years, it did not matter. That land is now held in trust under these particular nobility kingdoms. And guess what? You are now a tenant on that land, and hence you have to pay a fee, what we know today as taxes. And they put before them lords who would administer their said land estate. And those lords today are known as state and city and county municipalities that are taxing said land. It's the same system family that we see today. But we'll continue. Stafford tenants were themselves lords of the manor they held from him, which is altogether different from being barons. Okay, so barons in the Kingdom of England, a feudal barony or barony by tenure was the highest degree of feudal land tenure, namely per baronium, under which the landholder owed the service of being one of the king's barons, the duties owed by and the privileges granted to feudal barons are not exactly described. So whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter whether they were lord of manors or barons. They were all holding positions to manage the land estate by the nobility. This said land estate that was confiscated from the indigenous population. Henry de Oily, who held 3 fees from Robert de Stafford, also held as tenant-in-chief over 30 fees elsewhere that had been granted to him directly by the king. See? Because that's whose estate is ultimately benefiting. Thus, while Henry was the vassal of his overlord Robert, Henry was himself a lord of his own manors, held in captivity and self-oft. Many of his manors which he did not keep in demesne. That is to say, under his own management, using a simple, I know they didn't say simple employee. Yes, they did. That is to say, under his own management, using simple employees. It would have also been possible and not uncommon for a situation where Robert of Stafford was a vassal of Henry elsewhere, creating the conditions of mutual lordship / vassalage between the two. These complex relationships invariably created loyalty problems through conflicts of interest. To resolve this, the concept of liege lord existed, which meant that the vassal was loyal to his liege lord above all others except the king himself, no matter what. However, even this sometimes broke down when the vassal would pledge himself to more than one liege lord. Okay, so in other words, child, it could be sliced up and diced up however they want to say regarding who's managing the estate. At the end of the day, that's what it is. It is the king's boys now managing the land estate of this nobility, different houses, which they got the land through war. and confiscation of the indigenous people of the land. Okay? And this is also why when we talked about in one of the other episodes of this series, we learned the term tenacity, which set up in law and precedents on how they could, if they didn't have the proper succession through bloodline for rulership, meaning the Black nobility, that they could bring in distant relatives or do it through marriage because they needed someone to continue to manage the estate. So continue to manage the land and the resources. All right, so let's see other examples of where feudalism was practiced. 11th century France. Among the complexities of feudal arrangements, there existed no guarantee that contracts between lord and vassal would be honored, and feudal contracts saw little enforcement from those with greater authority. This often resulted in the wealthier and more powerful party taking advantage of the weaker. All right. So I'm not going to go through that because as far as I'm concerned, if the land is not through bloodline of being upon that land for generations, if it was granted to you, or if the land was granted to you, bottom line is you're not the true owner of that land. So it doesn't matter if this person was granted the land, that person was granted the land, but because this person has higher rank in the king's court, they outbullied or tried to outslick someone else that was granted land. None of that matters to me. If land was granted to you, if land was patented to you through the king, and your bloodline lineage does not tie back to that land for several generations where you are indigenous to the land, none of that matters. It's still fraud. Okay? All right. So feudalism in the Holy Roman Empire. We'll do something separate on that because I'm sure that's going to be deeper. Okay, Portugal. Okay, remember Portugal was the first one that kicked off what they're calling today the transatlantic slave trade. And we discovered that Portugal was the one getting the slaves from West Africa, but they were also getting the slave. It was a combination of getting folks that were prisoners of war, not only from Africa, but also within their kingdom and across Europe. And that particular population was taken to South America. And Portugal was the largest slave holder, the slave runners per se. Okay, so I don't want us to forget how Portugal plays into this game. And I also want us to understand what slavery really meant. And when they talk about these transatlantic slave numbers of millions being in the U.S., I say again, how, Sway, when the largest numbers came from Portugal was 5 million, and they went to South America, and the least was 300,000, which was North America. All right, so I know that's another topic. We did a drop on that. I'll include that in this particular series as well in this video, so you can be more versed on that if you are not. Portugal, originally part of the Kingdom of Leon, was an example of a feudal society, according to Mark Bloch. Portugal has its roots in a feudal state in northern Iberia. The county of Portugal, established in 868 within the Kingdom of Asturias. The Vimara Paris, the local count's dynasty, was suppressed in 1071, but 22 years later, in 1093, King Alfonso IV of Leon and Castile gave the county as a fiefdom to Henry of Burgundy, when he married Teresa, the king's natural daughter. In spite of their vassal link, Henry had a remarkable autonomy, especially after his father-in-law's death in 1109. The Portuguese independence was attained by his son Alfonso I of Portugal, when after defeating the Muslims at the Battle of Oracle. Proclaimed himself King of Portugal in 1139, cutting definitively all feudal bonds with the King of Leon. Upon seeing the weakness of feudal society due to Muslim invasion, Portugal became independent from the Kingdom of Leon, as Castile had done a century earlier. So that's Portugal's bout with feudalism. Right? Let's go to the North American colonies. Semi-feudal system accompanied colonialism in some European settlements in North America. So it's saying the patroon system in New Netherlands. So New Netherlands was a 17th century colony of the Dutch Republic that was located on what is now the east coast of the United States. So you talking that New York, Jersey, Delaware area. So the patroon system. So patroon was a landholder with manorial rights to large tracts of land in the 17th century Dutch colony of New Netherlands on the east coast of North America. Through the Charter of Freedoms and Exemptions of 1629, the Dutch West Indian Company first started to grant this. So I say again, there were indigenous people in North America prior to, 1629? So a charter was issued, and through the Dutch West Indian Company, they started to do what? Grant land. So let's go back over this again. Patroon system in New Netherlands. So we talking the East Coast area, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, which lasted until the Anti-Rent War and the New York Constitution of 1846. So the Anti-Rent War was a tenants' revolt in upstate New York in the period 1839 to 1849. The anti-renters declared their independence from the manor system run by patroons, resisting tax collectors, and successfully demanding land reform. So they're pretty much telling you what system they used in colonialism and how land was granted or assigned. Okay? Not just because something is assigned or granted does not mean it is inheritedly someone's. Okay? So apparently, we keep seeing this reoccurring theme, whereas these European nobility empires are going around the planet winning particular wars, land is being confiscated and reissued to just a set of the kings and them boys and family members. Okay? And then everybody else is left as tenants and having to pay rent and taxes on said land. And some of those tenants are indigenous folks of said land whose family have been on that land for thousands of years, if not millions of years. That they are the true rightful bloodline of that land. Okay? So again, I say, these ruling families understand where the real wealth is. It is not in the fiat currency. The real wealth is in the land and the people. The people are tied to the land. The land is tied to the people. Okay. So the Feudal System of New France, now Canada, which was abolished in 1854 under British rule through transitional rent payments. Baby, stop playing with me. They better stop playing with me. That persisted until 1970. Child, let's see this Negro System of New France, the Feudal System of New France, known as the Feudal System, was the semi-feudal system of land tenure used in the North American French colonies or colonial empire. Okay, so let me see. All right, so let's say in the non-Western European feudalism, outside of the medieval European historical content, the concept of feudalism is generally used by analogy called semi-feudal, most often in discussions of Japan under shogun. Child, see, I didn't learn me something new. I did not know that. Interesting. So most often in discussions of Japan under the shoguns and sometime 19th century Ethiopia. However, some have taken the feudalism analogy further, seeing it in places as diverse as, what, child? Ancient Egypt, the Parthian Empire, India, and the American South of the 19th century. Child. All right, so we know ancient Egypt. So what are they talking about? America South. Okay, so and this would make sense when they're talking about the feudal system used in the American South, because we know that melanated people, a lot of land was confiscated in the South from melanated people, all the way up until, we want to say, the 90s. Okay. And some were harassed off of the land, so it was abandoned. But that's still, nonetheless, just because somebody leaves something there doesn't mean somebody else can just come and pick it up. But anyway, the history of the southern United States spanned back hundreds of years and includes the Mississippian people, well known for their mound building cultures. European history in the region began in the very earliest days of the exploration of the colonization of North America. Okay. All right. So we knew all of that. I just thought they was going to put something on this feudalism and this stealing of the land. So the Byzantine Empire, Peronia, the 11th century system of land grants. Baby, they've been busy, but they're consistent. The 11th century system of land grants in the Byzantine Empire makes a useful contrast to feudal tenure in the European West. Another distinction between the European West can be made in that Parochi, people who lived and farmed on the land of the Peronias, owed no debt or loyalty to the Peronias, the recipients. This system was adopted by Serbia, and then, the Ottoman Empire, after the fall of the Byzantine Empire at their hands, which called the land grants Timar and the recipients of the land grants Timarites. So y'all see how far back this stuff goes? Russia, in contrast to Western Europe, where feudalism created a strong central power, it took a strong central power to develop feudalism in Russia. Russia always buck up. A lack of true central power weakened the Russians to outside domination. The Russians developed a system of land/lord/worker, loosely called feudalism, after it had created a strong central power. So Russia called it land/lord/worker. But they couldn't do it until they had enough wars to create this centralized power structure. Lacking a feudal system of vassal loyalty made it impossible for any prince early on to gain enough influence and power to project a strong force against any invader. In contrast to other European forms of serfdom and feudalism, there was a lack of vassalage and loyalty to the lord whose land the serfs worked. So let's do serfdom real quick. Serfdom was the status of many peasants under feudalism, specifically relating to manorialism and similar systems. It was a condition. I want you all to pay close attention. It was a condition of debt, bondage, and indentured servitude with similarities to and differences from slavery. Okay? It's the same system. The exact same system. All right. So, child is finna get deeper. It took a much longer period of time for feudalism to develop, but when it did, it took on a much harsher form than elsewhere in Europe. Serfs had no rights whatsoever. They could be what? They could be what? They could be traded like livestock by their lords. Don't that sound like the slavery narrative that they give you? Because that also happened under them indenture serving contracts. Yeah, your contract could be bought out. They had no ownership of anything, including their own families, which all belong to the Lord. Another major difference was the lack of independent principalities. This was due to the lack of vassalage. as separate lords did not command their own troops to protect their own land. Okay, now I'm fencing to be honest. This Russia description really pretty much describes how it was always done. They just slap other terms on it. Okay? Indentured servitude, prisoners of war / prisoners / slavery. It's all the same thing. Okay? The wealth is the land and the people. Okay? Armenia. Let's see what Armenia is talking about. The Nakahara system used by the Armenian nobility. See, there you go. Throughout medieval Armenia has often been described as feudal, with hereditary houses of nobles owning large estates, each headed by its own tanator, and with estates themselves divided amongst the family. So what are they calling tanator? So it's the head of the Armenian Nakahara house in ancient and prior. Okay, whatever. For Armenian as a whole, a Sapapet, supreme commander, a king, and chief aspect were each taken from individual noble houses. However, Armenian feudalism differs from the feudalism of most of Europe, as the estates were owned by families, not lords, and could not be split or given without the family's permission. Okay. And to be honest, it's really no different. Only thing is, in the European system, these lords are just really the administrators of the estate. They still don't own it. It's still owned by those families. Also, if a tanator died heirless, he was succeeded by a different branch of family rather than by a noble who was sworn to him. Sicilian Armenian, through contact with Crusader states, had a system even closer to Western feudalism, the economic and political system of medieval Europe, in which people exchanged loyalty and labor for a lord's protection. All right, child, y'all see all of this? We ain't got too much longer. And I know we're supposed to be on the lineage, which we are. I wanted to take this time to also go through feudalism so you all can really get a grasp on where this whole land ownership, taxation, and all that jazz came from. All right, so let's go. And you can see this is a worldwide system. This is worldwide. So when people sit up here and talk about, the new world order is going to come, it's been here. It's been here long ago. It just keeps getting repackaged. So India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Now get ready, y'all. I'm finna butcher some names. Not saying I wasn't butchering them before. The Taladagri and Zamadari system is often referred to as a feudal or feudal-like system. Originally, the system was introduced in pre-colonial period to collect taxes from peasants. And it continued during the colonial British rule. After independence, Zamindari was abolished in India and East Pakistan, present-day Bangladesh, but it is still present today in Pakistan. In modern times, historians have become very reluctant to classify other societies into European models, And today it is rare for zamindari to be described as feudal by academics. It is still done in popular usage. However, but only for projective reasons to express disfavor, typically by critics of the system. So y'all want to sit up and play games and don't want to call a spade a spade. Just like you don't want to admit that capitalism is still feudalism at the end of the day. So y'all don't want to call a spade or spade a spade. Oh, okay then. You want us to believe that feudalism was shut down and these other systems stood up for it to be better for the people. Okay. Peep game family. Let's get to China. The People's Republic of China is officially a Marxist-Leninist society and state based on socialism with Chinese characteristics under a people's democratic dictatorship. And attempts have been made by Marxist academics to record China's history in the PRC. Feudalism is the model that modern Chinese Marxists and Tokyo School historians use to identify China's recent past. Neologized from the Chinese concept Fingjian, which means to allocate a region. Now, I want y'all to peep land. Peep land. Peep game and peep land too. Which means to allocate a region or piece of land to an individual, establishing him as the ruler of that region. That's no different from lordship. No different. A term used to designate the multi-state which existed in China under the Zhou dynasty, which was eradicated by, I don't know if that's Qin or Qin. I think it's Qin. By which time the state of Qin, and forgive me if it's Qin, had conquered all other states and established the first China-wide empire. So do you all peep game? Once they consolidate these empires, this feudalism kicks right on in nice and well. So meaning after all of the warring has happened, all of the land confiscated, then that's when the feudalism kicks in, meaning those particular nobility kingdoms, empires assign the land to whom they want to assign it to. And in many times when they're granting land, it is only for the purpose of the folks they're granting to it to be the manager of that land, but they don't own it. That's why they still have to kick back taxes. They still got to run them ends to them estates, to the king's them estates. After King Wu of Zhou defeated the Shang dynasty, he created 5 hereditary ranks: Gong, Ho, Bo, Zi, and Nan, commonly translated, child, stop playing with me, commonly translated as Duke, Marquis, Earl or Count, Viscount, and Baron. However, unlike their Western European equivalents, the titles often indicated more in the way of perceived nobility rather than the amount of land possessed. So just like I just sat up here and done said, the king's boys, them lords, all of them carrying them titles, dukes and earls, that does not mean they own that land. That just means they're given that land to use and given territory to manage, but it does not matter. You're going to kick them ends back up to the estates of the kings and them. So that's the ends in regards to taxes and the ends regarding to any type of commerce that's happening on that land is getting taxed. For example, the lords of the eventually huge states of Qin and Chu were known as earls and viscounts, while the lord of Song was given the title of duke on the merits of his descendants from the previous Shang royal lineage rather than his level of power. So you all still don't think that the New World Order has already happened? Ancient Chinese texts can sometimes cause confusion, as it was also considered to be polite to address rulers as gong, regardless of their actual rank. As the Zhao dynasty controlled weakened, the region's magnates caused further title inflation by referring to themselves as king. The inflation was such that under the Han dynasty, many local lords were established with the title of king in imperial China. The character is thus more normally rendered as prince. The Zhao dynasty can be seen as a true feudal system, as it is in many respects very similar to the system used in medieval Europe. Each lord was given land, and his power was legitimized by nominal alliance to the central Zhao king. Politics thus revolved around these noble households. In fact, the notion of prime minister in ancient Chinese came from feudal time, meaning the chief housekeeper. Child, you better stop playing with me now. Come on now, Wikipedia. Whoever wrote this, shout out to y'all. Baby, y'all laid this out. So you means to sit up here and tell me, back up in the day, prime minister meant chief housekeeper or butler of the noble household? Baby, I'm done. Stick me with a fork, I'm done. That confirms that these people holding these titles of prime minister, president, they're just administrators of an estate. The estate rolling back up to one of them nobility folks. Child. In a similar way to the development of such European titles as constable. And I think in Texas, y'all still had a title on the legal side as constable. I'm pretty sure you do. If I'm not mistaken, some of your courts people are called constable. It makes sense. Each feudal state was governed independently with taxes, currency, and laws set by each individual household, but the nobles were required to pay regular homage to Zhao's kings as an act of fealty. In times of war, the nobles were required to provide armed services to the king. Approaching the end of the Zhao dynasty, the power of the king dwindled while the power of the nobles had risen. This resulted in what is known as the spring and autumn period and warring states period, when the nobles fought each other constantly for supremacy. This resulted in the collapse of the noble ranking system, with the feudality organized society of the springs and autumns largely replaced by more bureaucracy states with standing armies who no longer paid any attention to the Zhao. Child. After King Yin Xing of Qin, or I don't know if that's Quinn, known to prosperity as the first emperor of Qin, defeated his rival states, disposing the Zhao and founding the first empire. He formally abolished the largely defunct feudal system, replacing it with the bureaucratized system of literate civil servants. So, again, it does not matter how they rename it. It's the same system. Okay. Despite the rapid collapse of the Qin and an abortive attempt at restitution of feudalism by Shang Yi, the following Han dynasty maintained the vast majority of his bureaucracy reforms, established them as new standards of government for the next 2,000 years of imperial Chinese history. While Han Confucian scholarship would decry the first emperor as a tyrant whose crimes against humanity, including removing feudalism, looked back on as an integral to the idealized society of the Western Zhao, feudalism in the sense of developed power for military elite will not again be implemented in China. Okay, so I'm just telling y'all that it's feudalism is still the same system worldwide. They just keep renaming it. Okay. Child, they even had it in Tibet. Whether Tibet constituted a feudal society system or if peasants can be considered serfs is still debated. Studies districts of Tibet between the 17th and 20th century show evidence of a saturated society with land ownership laws and tax responsibilities that resembled European feudal system. So again, y'all want to run past me again how we're already in a new world order system? However, scholars have pointed out key differences that make the comparison contested. Only limited evidence from that period is available for study. Scholar Jeff Samuel further argued that Tibet, even in the early 20th century, did not constitute a single state, but rather a collection of districts, excuse me, and a legal system of Laos with particular land and tax laws did not extend over the entire country. However, according to Melvin Goldstein, the 20th century, the Tibetan political system cannot be categorized as feudalism. And just back to China, just real quick, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, but in China, it's still that you can really only lease land, and the longest you could do that is for 99 years, if I am not mistaken. Okay, so they're kind of being a lot more, how do I want to say it? Transparent, just a little more transparent, and that folks truly really don't own land to this day because it's rolling back up to these particular European empires, okay, or in their case, Asian empire. Okay, so Japan, the Tokugawa shogunate was a feudal military dictatorship of Japan established in the 17th century, lasting until 1868. It marks a period often referred to loosely as feudal Japan, otherwise known as the Edo period. While modern historians have become very reluctant to classify other societies into European models, in Japan, the system of land tenure and a vassal receiving tenure in exchange for the oath of fealty is very close to what happened in parts of medieval Europe, and thus the term is sometimes used in connection with Japan. Friday notes that in the 21st century, historians of Japan rarely invoke feudalism, instead of looking at similarities, specialties, attempting comparative analysis concentrated on fundamental differences. Okay, so Scotland, we should already know this, but we'll just go through these last couple. Scotland. Scot law is quite different from English law. One scholar explained it in 1924 as follows. It is, okay, so I want y'all to peep game again. It is a law of Roman and feudal origins, which has been adapted in the course of 8 centuries by legislation and by judicial decisions to the needs of the Scottish people. And during the last century, has little by little been combining with the English law by a slow operation of fusion. So, just again, what did this scholar say? Scottish law is what? Roman law? And of feudal origin? The system of land tenure in Scotland was until recently feudal in nature. In theory, this meant that the land was held under the crown as ultimate feudal superior. Historically, the crown would make a grant of land in return for military or other services, and the grantees would in turn make sub-grants for other services and so on. Thus making grants, the superiors retained a legal interest in the land. And so a hierarchical structure was created, with each property having a number of owners, coexisting simultaneously. Only one of these, the vassal, has what in normal language would be regarded as the ownership of the property. The abolishment of feudal tenure. Y'all, this was just, child, let me sip this water. You mean to tell me they just abolished that in 2000? Abolished the feudal system of land tenure in Scotland and replaced it with a system of outright ownership of land. Okay. And again, I'm telling you, it's that land still rolls up to the crown. Because anytime you have to pay taxes on land, anytime that you have to, any type of commerce that you do on said land, you have to pay taxes on. That is not ownership, and you paying taxes on the commerce that you conduct does not render you sovereign. Okay? Since the act became fully effective from November 28, 2004, the vassal owners the land outright and superiority interest disappeared. The right of feudal superiors to enforce conditions was ended, subject to certain savings provisions of a restricted nation. Feudality was abolished, although compensation may be payable. The delay between royal assent and coming into force was caused by the great number of transactional arrangement needed to be put in place before final abolition, and because of the close relation that of the 2000 Act has the Title Conditions Act of 2003. So in England, unique in England, the village of Laxton in Nottinghamshire continues to retain some vestige of the feudal system in which the land is still farmed, using the open field system. The feudal court now meets only annually, with its authority now restricted to management of the farmland. Sark, the tiny island of Sark in the Channel Islands, was arguably the last feudal state in Europe, until August 9, 2008. The island was a fiefdom of the larger nearby island of Guernsey and administered independently by Signier, who was a vassal to the landowners, the Queen of the United Kingdom. Sark's ruling body voted on October 4, 2006 to replace the remaining tenement seats in chief pleas with the fully elected Democratic government, which was implemented on April 9th, 2008. So again, doesn't matter that they stopped calling it feudalism and now they're calling it a democratic government. Doesn't matter. It's the same system. Anytime you are paying said taxes on land, you're on a feudal system. Anytime you are paying taxes for your said labor, you're considered a serf. Anytime you are paying taxes on the commerce that you generate, that is still a feudal system. I don't care what name they give it. And that said taxes ultimately rolls back up to the crown. Okay? North Korea. North Korea has been described as a feudal state because of their caste system, Songbon. Regular citizens can be seen as peasants, soldiers as knights, higher members at the Workers' Party of Korea as nobles, and the King dynasty as monarchs. So there you have it, family. That's what feudalism is. So just as a reminder, how it started under David the First. Okay. So the young king, unlike most heads of state, practiced philanthropy by pardoning 3 years of taxation for any subject who improved their homes, dress, and table manners. He introduced the feudal system of Scotland. So he introduced the feudal system to Scotland, but make no mistakes, it was going around the world. This was and is a worldwide system. So I'm going to stop there. I wanted us to get a little further, but I had to take this opportunity to go over feudalism so you can truly understand its origins, what it really means, and how it's carried out today. So we will pick up as part 6 in this series. We're going to pick up with Malcolm IV, and it may be some kings in between there as well. So I want to thank you all, family, for joining us on WTUZ Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Rhonda, and if you're not subscribed to us, I highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share. I wish everyone well on this Wednesday. Peace and love, family.
What?